So I'd like to welcome you to this webinar. My name is Devin Ellsworth. I'm a current graduate student at American University studying health promotion management. And the title of this talk today is Embracing Abundance, Tips for Transitioning to a Plant-Based Diet. And what we're going to talk about today is, first of all, what is a plant-based diet? And then I'm going to talk a little bit about the environmental reasons for adopting this particular diet, and then some of the health reasons. And then finally, I'll close it out with a couple of homework assignments, things for you to think about, and maybe some tips too. So first off, I titled the talk Embracing Abundance because I think too often when we talk about shifting your diet to, in this case, a plant-based diet, or some people think that that's synonymous with a vegan diet, and it has a lot of similarities, but I'll talk briefly here about what the differences are too. But whenever anybody talks about cutting out animal products and meat and dairy and eggs and things like that, people's mind tends to go quickly to what you're giving up and what you can't eat anymore. And that's certainly natural to some extent, especially when you're first starting out. However, I wanted to really sort of flip that notion on its head and talk about how, when I first adopted a plant-based diet, I didn't feel deprived, and in fact, I felt like I was embracing the abundance of plant foods, with such diverse tastes and textures and colors and all of that. So I've never once felt deprived or like I'm missing something, and I kind of wanted to share that feeling. So as we go through this, I'd like for you to sort of keep that in mind, that while you are eliminating certain food groups that you once ate, you're actually sort of making room on your plate for some of the healthiest foods in the world, and the things that are going to keep you full longer, probably help you lose some weight, will make you feel great all along, give you tons of energy, things like that. So it's really a great shift to undertake if you can do it. And we'll talk at the end about just how much you need to do to see benefits. Do you need to go 100%, things like that. So the whole talk should last about 40 to 45 minutes, and like I said, at the end there will be a couple activities for you to do, and then a handout on the last slide for more resources. So very quickly, to point out the differences between a plant-based diet and a vegan diet, just so we don't get confused. The reason why I don't use the term vegan diet in this case is because Oreos are vegan, French fries are vegan, Coca-Cola is vegan. So there's a lot of junk food that is vegan. It doesn't use any animal products, but that doesn't make it healthy. So those two things are not always synonymous by any means. So really the full name of the diet is a whole foods plant-based diet, and basically the emphasis is put on plant foods in their most natural and unprocessed form. Whole fruits and vegetables, whole grains that are minimally processed, beans, nuts, seeds, legumes, things like that. So just a couple things to keep in mind as we start. So I always like to begin the talk with this diagram. This is the USDA My Plate. It's our updated version of the old food pyramids. And I start here because I really like to point out that a plant-based diet is not as extreme as you may think. In fact, it's fairly similar to what the government recommendations currently are. I mean, right away, if we look at this plate and we sort of exclude the cup of dairy for just a moment and just look at the plate, a full 3/4 of the food that should be on every plate is plant foods. Your fruits, vegetables, and grains, and they recommend making half of your grains whole, and I would go as far to say there's no reason not to try to make them all whole, but do what you can there. So already we're talking about 75% of your plate being from plant foods. And then in the protein category, I like that they called it protein and not meat, because unfortunately in the English lexicon, those two words have become synonymous when in reality there's a ton of great plant foods that are high in protein, and we'll talk more about that towards the end of the presentation. But plant sources of protein are healthy and great for you, and are complete proteins despite some of the misconceptions. So I like that they called it protein and left the door open for those to be plant sources as well. And in fact, they recommend that you vary your sources and get plant proteins as well from things like nuts and beans and legumes. So already we see that a plant-based diet is not too far off from where the USDA thinks we should be. And again, the dairy is a sort of its own category, but we'll talk about that in just a minute. So this is sort of the stripped down version of what a plant-based diet looks like. This is called the Power Plate, and it's from the Physicians Committee for Responsible Medicine. And really doesn't look much different from the previous plate. The big difference is that the protein category has just been relabeled as legumes. And so otherwise your fruits, vegetables, and grains are all still on the plate, making up 3/4 of it. And then again, your protein is just going to come from beans and nuts and seeds and soy products, tofu as well can fit into that category. So not too far off, again, from where the USDA is. And then finally, if you're not sick of looking at plates just yet, I include this one as the last one because I think this really gets as close to where I think we should be eating as all of them do. And maybe it's the most practical view. So again, you've got that 3/4 of the plate being those plant foods, and they go straight to the whole grains for all of them, for your grain foods, and tell you to limit refined grains, which is really sound advice. And then they label their protein category healthy protein, and they say choose fish, poultry, beans, and nuts, limit red meat, and avoid bacon, cold cuts, and processed meats altogether, which are full of some pretty nasty preservatives and other things. So again, this is a mostly plant-based diet with the exception of the fish and the poultry being included, but that can be sort of a part of the mix. But the emphasis is still on these whole plant foods. And then, of course, they have water in the glass as opposed to milk and actually advocate limiting milk and dairy, as well as juice and sugary beverages. And they advocate for water, tea, or coffee with little or no sweeteners. Really important point as well. So this is sort of meant to just set it up as sort of change your thinking that a plant-based diet, a diet that focuses on whole plant foods, is not far off from where the experts recommend that you eat. So let's talk a little bit about why. Why should we adopt a plant-based diet? We'll start with the environmental argument, the toll of animal food production. So plant-based diets are better for the planet. So I'll start out with a question. If you could avoid one of these behaviors altogether for the rest of your life, which would be better for the environment? And on the left, that represents all forms of powered transportation, so buses, cars, trains, planes, anything that sort of has a motor and spits out greenhouse gases. Or on the right-hand side, that represents eating all animal foods, so meat, fish, dairy, eggs. So if you could only pick one to avoid for the rest of your life, which would be better for the environment? As it turns out, avoiding animal agriculture is best. Animal agriculture produces 40% more greenhouse gases than all of transportation combined. And in fact, the average greenhouse gas impact of an omnivore is 7 times greater than that of a vegan when it comes to diet. And I really like these two statistics, and when I first saw them, they sort of astounded me, that the greenhouse gas emissions associated with animal agriculture is just so high. But basically, why I like this is because weighing the two options of never using transportation again or never eating animal products again, you quickly realize that although both of them may seem extreme at the get-go, only one of them is even really possible in our modern world, where we rely on transportation so heavily. I mean, if you avoided it altogether, you could never take a car or a bus or a train ever again. You could never have anything shipped to you. You could never, function in our economy. But you can avoid animal products. But plenty of people do it, millions upon millions throughout the world, and it's not as extreme. And in fact, when you choose to avoid animal products, your impact is 40% greater than choosing to not use transportation. So I think it's a practical choice that we all can make, and we can certainly move in that direction even if we don't decide to go 100% plant-based and vegan. But so why is it? Why is it that the production of meat and animal products is so much worse for the environment? What is it about that? So to understand that, we can take sort of a page from nature, from ecology. And whether or not we like to admit it, sometimes we are still a part of the natural world and have to obey by the laws of nature. And so what we see here is a simple food chain. You may remember learning about this in elementary school, but basically one thing eats another thing, and then that thing gets eaten by a top predator, and that's sort of the chain. And so this is a very simple chain that we see in our current food system. So on the bottom is the sun, and then the corn takes up energy from the sun and puts it into the little corn kernels. Then we feed that corn to cattle, and I put this picture because that's unfortunately where most cattle in this country live. It's not the happy cow grazing on grass, but it's these cows shoulder to shoulder and thousands upon thousands. And then that cow gets slaughtered and ends up as the burger that this gentleman is enjoying here. So the energy is moving up in this system. And now what we see, and this is true throughout nature, that on average, every time you move up a level on this food chain, only about 10% of the original energy is maintained. So the rest of that energy is going to go to that organism living its life. So if there was 1,000 units of energy in the sun, theoretically, it would make its way into only 100 units of energy in corn kernels, which would be only 10 units of energy in the cow, and then just 1 unit of energy by the time it gets its way to the hamburger. The other 90% of that energy is going to go to the cow staying alive. It takes a year or so for a cow to get to the point where it can be slaughtered. So that other 90% just gets burned off in the average, daily life of the cow. Likewise, for the corn plant, a lot of that energy goes to building the structure of the corn stalk and the root structure and the time that it takes for the corn to actually produce kernels. So, if we sort of cut out the middle cow in this system, we would see on average a 10-fold increase in the amount of energy that would be available to humans. Basically, we're feeding our energy through a mediary, which is the animal, and losing most of that energy in the process. So it becomes very energy intensive to eat on the very top of the food chain. And just to sort of drive this point home, I think this is a very intuitive relationship when you think about the fact that there are more foxes in the world than there are more rabbits in the world than there are foxes. There's more cows than there are humans because we are on the top of this food chain and most of the energy gets lost. And so, in fact, what we see is that if we fed the grain that we currently feed to the world's cattle to humans instead, we could feed an additional 8.7 billion people. There's only about 7 billion people on the planet right now, and we're just talking about cattle, not even other animals that we still, feed this grain and process it through their bodies basically to make calories for us. We're just talking about cattle, just one animal. That's how wasteful, I mean, cows in particular, but really meat in general can be. So there's enough energy in the corn to feed to more than double our world's population. Not that that would be a good thing, but we are still growing as a globe, and people are definitely concerned with how to feed the world. And so what I generally say is that feeding the world may not be a problem of production, but of priority. So is it more important that the richer people in the world get to eat beef than it is feeding our population? And so if we start to reduce the amount of meat that we eat, it frees up resources to grow plant foods that are just more energy efficient, more efficient at converting that energy into calories that we can consume. So I'm not saying that it would be a direct, instead of shipping the corn to the cow feedlots, we'd ship it to the starving people in the world. But it would certainly free up the resources a bit more to start growing the types of foods that can actually sustain human life. And then because it takes so much corn to feed a cow and keep it alive, to produce just 1 pound of beef, it takes 2,500 gallons of water. And that goes to growing the corn. It goes to keeping the cow alive and hydrated. Throughout the entire system, there's just an astounding amount of water that goes into producing, and that's just 1 pound of beef. And if you think about how many pounds of beef are on one cow, could be hundreds. That's a lot of water that goes into keeping that cow alive so that we can eat it. So that's sort of the general overview of why in our current system meat production is just incredibly wasteful, and any effort that we can make to reduce our consumption of meat and animal products, and it's true for dairy and things like that too, because you're still keeping the animal alive, so it still takes an immense amount of resources that we could be devoting to better things. So the more we reduce our animal product consumption, the more we reduce our carbon footprint and reduce our greenhouse gas emissions, reduce our water use, our land use, things like that. So that's sort of the crux of the environmental argument. So now we'll shift to the health side of the equation. So plant-based diets are better for health. So let's sort of take a look at why that's. So I'm going to reference just briefly the China study, which was a large-scale epidemiological study conducted in China over many years, started back in the 80s, led by Cornell researchers, and they followed about 6,000 people over the course of this period of time throughout rural counties in China that had very different diets and lifestyles, exercise levels, and then the amount of animal products they were eating, the types of foods they were eating varied a lot from region to region. And they were trying to see if there was any link between the way people lived, their lifestyle behaviors, and their health and their disease outcomes. And they found over 8,000 statistically significant correlations between diet and lifestyle and disease, which is just an astounding number. But there was one relationship in particular that was consistent throughout all of the populations, no matter where they lived, basically. And so they found that there was one risk factor in particular that was predictive of all of these chronic diseases, including diabetes, heart disease, obesity, cancers of the liver, rectum, colon, lung, breast, prostate, brain, stomach, esophagus, and leukemia. So what was that risk factor? Was it their total blood cholesterol? Was it genetic factors? Or how about just the total fat that they were consuming? Or finally, was it environmental conditions? Pollution can be an issue in China. So was it where they lived? Well, what they found was that it was the total blood cholesterol. And as cholesterol rose, the risk of all of those diseases you see there rose. And inversely, as total cholesterol dropped, the risk of developing any of those conditions dropped. There's a pretty nice relationship for each of these diseases, and they were all studied separately. So the question is then, what affected the total cholesterol of these people? What was predictive of how high their cholesterol would be? Again, they found a pretty nice relationship. This isn't the exact line, but it was a fairly consistent relationship where as the amount of animal products that people were consuming rose, so did their total cholesterol, and thus their risk of developing all of those different types of chronic diseases. And they also found a very interesting relationship that pretty much directly opposed this one. They found that as consumption of plant foods increased, total cholesterol dropped. So basically what they were finding is that with increased meat consumption, you had increased risk. And with increased plant food consumption, you had a decreased risk. And we'll talk a little bit more about why this is. So when at meat products and dairy and eggs, and why they raise your total cholesterol, we're really talking about mainly saturated fat, but also trans fats and cholesterol. So the link between high saturated fat consumption and total cholesterol is pretty clear. It's been shown and demonstrated time after time that as you increase your consumption of saturated fat, your total cholesterol will rise. And then also trans fats raise your bad cholesterol and actually also lower your good cholesterol. So they're a double whammy. And although they're often found in our processed foods, they are also actually naturally found in animal products, and studies have shown that it has a similar effect even when it's coming from what we would think of as a more natural source. It's not added to the animal fat, but it's still a part of it, and thus it's still a problem. And then dietary cholesterol, which is only found in animal foods. There's no dietary cholesterol in any plant foods. But looking mainly at the saturated fat, since that's sort of the biggest player and the biggest predictor of your total cholesterol, this table here shows where the leading sources of saturated fat are in the American diet. So accounting for 8.5% of our total saturated fat consumption is cheese. Right below that is pizza, which is primarily on the list because of the cheese. So it just happened to be a different category. There's grain-based desserts coming in third, which are usually containing lots of eggs and dairy products as well, and butter. And then you have dairy desserts specifically, which is your ice creams and things like that. Then you have chicken, which surprises people because chicken is considered more a lean meat, but it still does contain saturated fat, and since we eat a lot of it in this country, it actually enters in at number 5 on the list. And then you've got things like sausage and bacon, burgers, beef, and even reduced fat milk. So even though the fat has been reduced, there's still significant saturated fat in it, and if you consume enough of it, it is going to raise your cholesterol all the same. So out of these top 8 or 9 foods here, they're all pretty much based on animal foods. So how about plant foods? Why are they protective? Why do they lower your cholesterol? Well, believe it or not, it's all about the fiber. And fiber is one of these essential nutrients or components of food that you may hear a lot about. You may have seen it added to a lot of processed foods like granola bars and cereal, but it's actually only naturally occurring in the plant kingdom. There is no fiber in animal foods. It only occurs in plant foods. Great sources of fiber include the beautiful beans that you see on this slide. Beans are a fantastic source of fiber. But really all whole plant foods are going to have fiber in them. Fruits have great fiber, vegetables have great fiber, and whole grains. Whole grains have a lot of fiber as well. And what happens is in your digestive tract, in your gut, the fiber sort of forms this gel-like substance that will actually bind to the cholesterol in your blood and sort of flush out when you excrete your waste. So the fiber is going to pull this cholesterol out of your blood, whereas the saturated fat that you consume primarily from the animal foods, although there is some saturated fat in some plant foods as well. But again, as we saw, the major sources are all animal sources. So the saturated fat is going to cause your body to make more cholesterol, but the fiber is going to pull it out of your blood. So that's why the people who ate the most plant foods had the lowest cholesterol. One of the other major reasons why eating plant foods is so protective of disease is the antioxidants. This is a graph showing the average antioxidant content of plant foods versus animal foods, and as you can see, it's no contest. Of course, there are some antioxidants found in animal foods, but it's just no comparison to the abundance that they're found in plant foods. Some of the superstars include berries. Berries have tons of antioxidants. Your leafy greens have great antioxidants, green tea, chocolate, things that you might have heard of. But in general, plant foods will have tons of antioxidants and animal foods relatively little. And that's going to be protective of things like cancer. So there's lots of great reasons to eat these plant foods over the animal foods. And one of the things that I always like to mention is that your plate only has so much space on it. Now we can sort of load it up in this country. Our portion sizes tend to grow more than they should maybe, but at the end of the day, you're still competing for space on your plate. And one of the tough things in nutrition science is studying and isolating one food. It's if you take away an animal food and replace it with a whole plant food, like a whole vegetable or fruit, was it the subtraction of the animal food that was protective, or was it the addition of the plant food that was protective, or was it a combination of both? And the reason why I point out these great components of both of plant foods and sort of the detrimental components of animal foods is not to simplify the foods into their components, but simply to point out that when you substitute animal foods for plant foods, you're taking away a relatively nutrient-poor food that may have some compounds in it that actually cause disease. And you're replacing it with a nutrient-rich food that has tons of compounds that are very protective of disease. So it's really a give and take. I can't answer for you, is it just the subtracting of the meat, or is it just the addition of the plant foods? It's probably a combination of both. But you have to remember that when you're eating a whole plant food, you're choosing some of the healthiest foods that we know of. And you're replacing some of the least healthy foods that we consume in this country. So that's sort of the crux of the health argument for why we should follow a plant-based diet. But of course, this is the first question that I get asked. Where do you get your protein? Well, somebody should have asked this guy that question, because he is a vegan and it looks like he's doing just fine, getting plenty of protein. So, but where do I get my protein? Spinach, of course, right? Spinach is the superfood of the vegans, right? So of course we're going to get our protein from spinach. Well, I'm half kidding, but spinach actually does contain more protein per calorie than beef. It's more than 50% protein in spinach. Of course, there's not a lot of calories in spinach, so to have it be a good source of protein for your diet, you'd have to eat a lot of spinach to equal the amount of protein you would get in, say, a steak or a burger. But I bring this up not to say that spinach is where you should get your protein from, but simply to point out that even a frou-frou vegetable like spinach that people would never think of as a source of protein actually has a ton of protein in it. And I point that out because all whole plant foods have protein in them. With the exception of fruits, which don't have very much protein. There's still some, but there's just not much. Whole vegetables, whole grains, and then certainly beans and nuts and legumes are all great sources of protein. And if we look to the author of the China study for some guidance and what they found in their study, basically you can't be protein deficient unless you are calorie deficient. So if you're not eating enough food, you're probably not going to get enough protein. But if you're eating enough food and you're getting enough calories, you're going to get enough protein. It's just in all whole foods. And of course, that's with an emphasis on whole foods, because some processed foods, you might have some of the protein stripped out. But again, the point of this diet is the emphasis on whole foods. So if you're getting enough calories and you're focusing on these whole foods, you're going to get enough protein. And really, just to drive this point home, let's take a look at the humble potato. So even if you ate nothing but potatoes all day, you'd still meet your minimum protein needs. That's right. So a food that no one would call a great source of protein. If you ate 2,000 calories of potatoes, while you might be very bored, you would be getting enough protein. So I don't advocate an all potato diet, but I advocate an all whole plant food diet. Sort of like we see here. So moving away from eating nothing but potatoes all day, there really is an abundance of plant foods available. And I like to sort of end by having you focus not on what you're giving up again, but focus on what you are getting. You're getting a world, a kingdom, a plant kingdom full of amazing tastes, textures, colors, smells, foods that fill you up, foods that clear your body of potential disease-causing agents, foods that help you lose weight, foods that help you feel fantastic, will give you tons of energy. So just a couple of really quick activities for you to do before we wrap this up. So to keep the focus on what you do like and what you are already eating, maybe, I want you to take a sheet of paper and make 2 columns. And on the first column, label it fruits, and the second column is vegetables. And then number each column from 1 to 5. This is going to be a very basic activity. But basically, I just want you to make your top 5 list for both fruits and vegetables. Write down your favorites. You know, there's a lot of attention paid to superfoods, and superfoods are great, but all plant foods are superfoods. They're all nutritional rock stars. They all have fiber, they all have vitamins and minerals, some more than others. But if you're eating whole plant foods and substituting some of the other things that were on your plate with whole plant foods, you're going to see benefits. So why not start with your top 5 list? So write down your list, and once you have it, what I'm going to have you do with it is start by just posting on your refrigerator. And then you're going to see it, every day. You're going to walk by in your kitchen, you're going to take a look at that list and just sort of think about, how good those foods are and how they taste, and get sort of excited about, having them. And then really when you go to the grocery store for the next time, this is where the exercise comes into play. I want you to take that list with you, and I want you to buy each of those items. And it doesn't matter if you can't find them fresh. Frozen is a great option, and in many cases actually has more nutrients than the fresh counterparts, especially if the fresh foods are out of season. So frozen's a great option, or canned can be a great option as well. It really doesn't matter as long as you're buying that and it's in a whole form. And so buy each of those items and then bring them home and stick them in your fridge. And the reason why, again, this sounds really simple, but the reason why I like this activity is really just based on the concept that if it's surrounding you, you will eat it. Or vice versa, if it isn't in the house, you can't eat it. And maybe that's the better way of looking at it, because, in my personal life, I found that I just don't believe in willpower. Within reason. I mean, some willpower is necessary for sure. But what I learned a long time ago was that if I buy junk food, I'm going to eat it. I mean, that stands to reason, right? If it's in the house, I'm going to eat it. And odds are good that I'm going to eat it quicker than I should. So I show all of my discipline at the register. If I don't bring it into the house, then I can't eat it. And that's for junk food, but that's true for healthy food. If I don't bring healthy food into the house, I can't eat it. So win the battle at the register. Bring the foods home with you. Once they're in your fridge, you're already 90% of the way there. You just got to figure out how to use them. Now, with your list of fruits, I would recommend those are great snacks throughout the day. Bring some to work with you to snack on, especially right before lunch. Fruit and the fiber will actually fill you up and you'll consume 4 calories at lunch. But really throughout the day, snacking on fruit is great. You can treat it as a dessert. I certainly do that from time to time. It's also great in the morning. My go-to breakfast is oatmeal, so I'll add fruit to oatmeal, or you can add it to your cereal, or you can just eat it whole, or make a fruit smoothie in the morning. So fruit is, I think, probably the easier one to incorporate, since it does serve as a snack sort of on its own. But with the vegetables, although it may be slightly trickier, once you have it in the house, it's easier to then have to find a recipe that uses it effectively. So you're going to have to move it to get to other foods. You're going to see it. You're going to be reminded, and you're going to think, oh, I should cook these carrots somehow, or these leafy greens that I bought, or the peppers that I have, or whatever it might be for you. So really surround yourself with healthy foods, and win the battle at the register. Don't put yourself in a place at home where you have to exercise control, because odds are you'll never be satisfied with the level of control that you have shown, and that just creates a whole world of issues surrounding food. So bring healthy foods into the house and use your top 5 lists to do that. And I would encourage you to make separate lists also for the other 2 pieces of the plant-based diet plate, your whole grains and your legumes or protein sources. That doesn't need to be a top 5 list, but so for whole grains, you have things like whole wheat bread or whole wheat pasta. Those are easy ones. But you've got brown rice or different types of quinoa, or there's other grains that are actually kind of fun to explore that you might find in the bulk food section of your local store. So you can get creative there. And then with the plant proteins, maybe your favorite beans. Beans are a staple of my diet. I try to eat them every day, and most days I do. Chickpeas, black beans, lentils, things like that. And then your nuts and seeds. I'm sure everybody has some type of nut or seed that they enjoy snacking on. And so make a list of those as well and bring those with you. That's the first activity, very basic. And then the only other activity that I have sort of stems from the other question that I get when I talk about going to a plant-based diet. And that is, how plant-based do I need to go? Do I need to go 100%? Do I need to cut out all animal foods entirely from my diet? And generally what I say is that whatever works for you. If you can, going 100% plant-based is a great choice. There is only one nutrient that you can't really find in a great concentration in plant foods, and that's vitamin B12. So if you do go 100%, I would recommend trying to supplement your B12 intake. But the rest of the vitamins and minerals essential to human life are found in abundance in the plant kingdom. And if you're focusing on whole plant foods, you should find that you are meeting your targets. And in fact, studies have shown that vegans have fewer vitamin and mineral deficiencies than omnivores. Now, again, the B12 is the area of concern, but for the rest of the essential nutrients, vegans actually have a lower incidence of deficiency. So going 100% plant-based is a great, healthy choice. You'll feel fantastic. You'll have more energy. Your skin will look better. And you may even lose a couple of pounds without really even having to count calories. That certainly happened to me. But do you need to go 100%? Well, that's up to you. One of the strategies that I advocate for comes from a personal hero of mine, Mark Bittman, who writes for the New York Times. Recently came out with a book called Vegan Before 6. And I would recommend reading that book if you can, but it chronicles sort of his dietary approach where he is vegan and focusing on these whole plant foods for the first 2 meals of the day, breakfast and lunch. And then for dinner, he allows himself to relax a little bit. So it's sort of a way to kind of be stricter in the morning and early afternoon, and then allow yourself to indulge a little bit at night, which I like. I think that's a good way of approaching it. It's very practical for a lot of people. So my final activity is to have you on a piece of paper write down a number between 1 and 7. And this number is the number of days that you are going to commit to eating vegan before 6 for the next 7 days, for the next week. So write that number down and then make that commitment to yourself. Maybe put something on your fridge as well that you can check off a box for every day that you do it. And it doesn't have to be dinner that is your non-vegan meal. If you really like your non-vegan breakfast, you could do that as your non-vegan meal. But basically the point is to make 2 out of 3 meals completely plant-based. And just some tips for breakfast is it could be as simple as switching almond milk for your cow's milk. I love almond milk, or soy milk, or there's other good alternatives. Or like I said, I do oatmeal a lot in the mornings and add various fruits and nuts to it, and really enjoying that. You can use tofu to simulate eggs, although if you're just starting out that might sound a little more extreme, but doing a tofu scramble is actually quite delicious in its own right. Or there's whole grain toast with peanut butter and jelly. If that's what you feel like you could have in the morning. Or there's fruit smoothies. And then for lunches, I do a lot of beans and type dishes. I'll do some pasta dishes. I'll do roasted vegetable curries and things like that. Or vegetable wraps. Or if you get right down to it, a peanut butter and jelly is a vegan option. So if you're stumped one day, you can start there and then just bring some fruits and veggies to snack on. So commit for next week, for the next 7 days, to how many days you can do. And then notice if you notice anything. Notice, do you feel different? Do you feel restricted? Do you feel healthier? Do you, what do you notice? So keep a journal or something, some way to log your thoughts. So those are my 2 activities for you. So sort of just to recap. So this is where we find ourselves today. This is how the typical American eats. Certainly not a plant-based diet or a whole foods plant-based diet. 63% of our calories are coming from processed foods, which don't resemble the products that they were created with. And that includes added fats and oils, sugars, and refined grains. Another 25% is animal foods in terms of calories: meat, dairy, eggs, fish, seafood. And this points out that cholesterol is only found in animal foods, and they're also the primary source of saturated fat. And then plant foods are only 12% of our total calories right now. So it's certainly not the 50% that the My Plate recommends, the 75%, I would say. because whole grains are on this list as well. So that 12% should be 75%. And up to half in this category, in fact, is things like almonds in candy bars, apples in apple pies, or spinach in frozen spinach souffle. So really only about 6% are in their whole natural form. And again, this points out that fiber is only found in plant foods. So this is the current state of affairs in America, and I don't need to remind you of the disease rates in America, the obesity rate of over 1/3 of Americans and another third being overweight, and then, cases of diabetes and heart disease and cancer just continue to be on the rise. So the current state of affairs is a bit far from where we could be. This is where we could be. This is a simple, healthy plate. And I encourage you to get as close to this plate every day for every meal as you can. Again, like I said, you don't have to go 100%. You don't have to start at 100%. Do what works for you, but do something. So this is my list of resources for you. The nutritionfacts.org has great videos summarizing some of the current research surrounding the benefits of a plant-based diet. Happy Herbivore has great meal plans if you want to dive in and go 100% for a week for just $5. She's got great meal plans that are super easy to make and super healthy. And then some blogs that have recipes, and then books that I found very useful, some cookbooks. And then films. The documentary Forks Over Knives I would highly recommend for the health argument, and then Food Inc. is a good overview of sort of the environmental argument. So I'd like to thank you once again for tuning in. It's been a pleasure, and I hope you got something out of this. And here's to happy, healthy eating of your whole plant foods. So best of luck. Thanks.